Hey, She Slayers, and welcome to another episode of She Slays Today podcast. I am your host, Dr. Lauren Brunslick. Okay, we are officially into 2024, which means that if any of us were writing checks anymore, we would spend the first month accidentally writing 2023. Half of you are too young to even understand that issue that happened with us. Um, Remember that your Medicare people have like $100 and some or $200 and some deductible. Let's see, what other kind of reminders do you need? If you're not motivated to set resolutions yet, that's okay. It's just a date. Me personally, we were having a conversation about resolutions with family. And I was talking about how 2023 really felt like a year that I needed to not rest, but kind of rest, like just allow certain projects that I had started to continue to play out and just not be pushing so hard. It was a big year of learning control and how a lot of my need for pushing um, has to do with my lack of going with the flow and allowing for flow to happen and just, and shocking, like December 31st, 2023 at midnight, my brain and body did not decide that it had finished that journey. So going into 2024 feeling very strange, not having like concrete goals and this, and resolutions, because that's how my brain likes. I like checklists. I love checklists. And what is resolutions except a checklist of things you need to do, but do them on repeat? Um, so my brain would feel much better if it was like, we need a plan. We need a better plan for 2024. But like my heart and like my aura or my soul or whatever, the non-brain part is just going like, hey, you've got plans. It's okay. You can just kind of let life happen to you for a little bit more before you start driving the bus again. Um, that brings me to a topic. So we don't cover this in our best of episode. Oh, by the way, this is part 2 of our best of 2023 episode. Um, but this is something that Kirby and I started doing a couple years ago and really love. And you still have time to do it, even though it's in January. You can still do this. And at the annual partner meeting. So, a lot of you are probably very familiar with the annual meeting that you do with your team. If you don't do an annual meeting with your team, even if it's just you and one person, I recommend you do it. But we started doing an annual partner meeting, meaning Kirby and I sit down and we talk about the year, what we have planned, what trips we have planned already, what kind of trips we want to do, what kind of renovations need, like, what kind of expenses do we have coming up? And then we also just talk about how we wanna incorporate more time. Like, it is kind of a resolution, but just more letting sharing your heart with your partner about, like, where you feel you want growth personally, professionally, spiritually, in this next year. So there's a much more detailed description of like the specific questions we go through in episode 191. If you want to scroll all the way back, I believe that was in 2022. So it could not make it in today's episode because it's old. But scroll back and give it a listen because I do think that is one of the best things that Kirby and I do to really, there's questions in there talking about the previous year and lessons we've learned, and it's just a beautiful date night opportunity for you. So we have grandma watch the kids, and we go out to our lake house and sit and eat pizza and cheers and make plans, and it's great. So I recommend it. So we're gonna jump in to today's episode, but we're gonna pray first. And if you're new to the podcast, starting, if you know much about my personality, but you haven't heard exactly why I start each podcast with a prayer, um, it is because I need a moment to recenter myself. Like, I need a moment to remind myself that these conversations are not about me. They're about you listening. Some of the topics that get covered on the podcast are really vulnerable and raw. And sometimes we just need a reminder that we're all doing this together. We are in this together, whether you're a chiropractor or not, whether you own your clinic or not. We are humans going through this experience, and that we cannot do this alone, and we cannot do this on our own will, our own hustle, our own drive, our own patience. And whether you believe in universe or source or God, whatever you want to call it, chiropractic is really founded in my opinion, in this concept of energy from above entering our body, opening our heart space so we can receive information, whether that's receive information from our own body, receive information from our surroundings, from others. And so I think that it just pairs really well with all the messages that we continue to learn from guests, etc. So take a breath. Relax your jaw if you are holding it. Let the shoulders drop. Dear God, thank you for all of the blessings that happened in 2023, and please guide us in 2024. Last prayer in part one was really about looking to the past and being grateful. In this prayer, I will look forward and look to what is to come. God, my favorite prayer is short, and it's just make it obvious. God, I don't trust that I am slow enough and present enough and still enough. And so, please, God, for me to be able to fully put my trust in you, I need to know just make it obvious. One of my biggest fears is that I'll miss my opportunity because I wasn't paying attention, and that creates so much anxiety in us if we think that we're just one missed opportunity away from, not fulfilling our purpose. So make it obvious. Please circle back with us. If there is a message that we need to learn, God, use the people in our lives to speak truth to us, and use what all of your tools to open up our hearts and receive that message, whether it is a change that needs to happen, um, something we need to stop doing, something we need to start doing, someone we need to reach out to, changes we need to make in our business, in our marriage, in our friendships. Maybe we need to start therapy, but just God, make it obvious. Thank you. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so we are going to jump in to, definitely one of my favorites. If you're wondering how we pick the best of, maybe you were a guest and you're like, how come I didn't get picked? I'm so sorry. It is hard for me. Like, typically we try and keep it to 8. And this year I was like, I'm asking for 10. Um, and so we look at downloads, engagement, shares, and just how much feedback we got from people on an episode. So episode 229 is Dr. Amy Haas. Definitely an amazing episode. You need to go listen to this entire episode, whether you are a chiropractor or not. This is groundbreaking information that we have about chiropractic and research. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not a research junkie. Okay. Like, I honestly think research is boring as F. And this episode was fascinating. So go give the full episode a listen. But here is a little teaser on the incredibly intelligent Dr. Amy Haas. I can see why chiropractors just get murdered when we start playing this game that was, I don't know, who started research? Like, who's like, I was medicine start research? Who started that?
Well,
And so
how do we communicate it? How do we
Mhm.
know what we can and can't say? And that's a matter of being very careful of not saying too much. When chiropractors were making direct claims that getting adjusted would prevent COVID-19, that was problematic
Mhm.
because as much as they knew that in their hearts, And theoretically, I don't disagree. They did not have the depth of evidence to defend their statement to those who wanted to discredit them. That's the third level of the paper. Is I've told you about the other story arcs. This is the overriding story arc. One mistake that we made a couple of years ago was not recognizing the distinction, very important distinction between evidence-based care, evidence-based medicine, and evidence-informed decision making.
What is the difference?
Evidence-based care requires you have RCT level evidence.
Oh, which we don't have, right? Like, that's the kind of research, like, we really don't have?
We have a couple.
Okay.
We have two or three that are the blood pressure study, and then Julie's study. Those were really beautifully done. Two studies.
Mm.
It would be helpful to have more, but we also have a bit of a problem designing a lot of research studies. A very simple question: but people with different subluxation patterns, can they be compared? No.
Oh, no.
No. And do we have a control group that we know has no subluxation?
No. Not
So, given the permutation of subluxations within this human vertebral column, and Chris Kent recently did an MRI study on this and showed this concretely, it would be extraordinarily difficult for us to conduct RCTs on a population because of the permutation problem.
Mhm.
So, if that's the case, is evidence based? I hate using the word medicine, but you know where I'm going with
Yeah,
this.
yes.
Evidence based care, which requires RCT, the most appropriate criteria of limiting your research. And in my opinion, it's not. I think we have a lot of observational studies, cohort studies, case studies, and clinical experience, which should be taken into account. And that's the distinction between evidence based care and evidence informed care. Evidence based care, you have to have an RCT. If you don't have an RCT, you're wrong. You cannot defend your statement. That's how we got browbeat.
Mm.
People didn't recognize that we don't have the depth of evidence according to their criteria. Very important differentiator, according to their criteria to make our statements.
I
That
just
is their
so, like,
criteria.
if I'm getting I just picture, like, at a dinner party, and,
Mhm.
this very smart medical doctor goes like, "Well, you don't have RCTs to practice EBM." And I'd be like, "Well, I'm not trying to practice EBM. I'm trying to practice EIC."
Yeah, evidence informed. Well, I
Like,
would agree with you.
will he be like, "Oh, snap, you just totally schooled me?" He'll be like, "Well, then I don't accept you." Like, can we just say like, "Well, we don't care about evidence-based. We're doing evidence-informed."
Well, we care about both of them. We want to make sure that we're
I was
using
just
the
being
evidence.
sassy to that doctor
I
when I
know,
said I
I
don't
know.
care.
Um,
I don't
so
care.
I agree with what you said. I'm going to add to it a little bit. So if someone were to say, huh, I don't know, maybe 25 years ago, my sister, Julie Haas, who was also a PhD, and she's actually a neuroscientist. When I was in chiropractic school, she turned to me over Thanksgiving dinner with a group of, I think it was like 12 to 15 family members, and turned to me and said, "There's no research to support that chiropractic is actually valid."
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Everybody at the table was dead silent, and at the time, I didn't have a good answer. I just sat there kind of shell-shocked. That's one of the reasons, actually, honestly, I thank her for that. After that time period, I said, "Do we have enough evidence?" And the question that, to speak to that, with the conversation you're having with your, esteemed colleague, your medical doctor over dinner, well, okay, so you're requiring that we follow evidence-based practice, but here's the thing, that's not really appropriate for us because we have more permutations than we can control for an appropriate RCT. So we are actually expanding our horizons to take into account observational evidence, which is very valid. Absolutely. Yes, sometimes it can have some problems with internal bias. I get that. But when you have enough studies that say the same thing, you got to listen to them. And so that's the distinction. Evidence based is a limitation. evidence informed care is a broader reaching assessment of literature as a whole. So if I were to put that a different way, the WFC, when they put out their uh, very flawed white paper on you can't say this because we don't have the right evidence, they were trying to write the rules. They were trying to say, according to our rules, you can't make these statements. And my answer to that is, I don't agree to your rules because they're not appropriate. We need to rethink what those rules should and should not be. And your limited assessment, your limited biased assessment of 7 studies that you put forth as evidence that we can't make these statements is unto itself very biased. So you violated your own premise, so to speak. And instead, we need to look at the broader literatures and ask questions like, can this be helpful? So, evidence informed care, I think, is a better paradigm for reading chiropractic literature. And most importantly, because that acknowledges health freedom, that acknowledges patients' right to hear different forms of evidence. It acknowledges our right to speak different forms of evidence and speak of our own clinical experience, because the amount of clinical experience amongst, let's say, roughly 50,000 chiropractors in the US who see this every day, and I do. I do. The reason I feel strongly about the impact of adjustment of vertebral subluxation eliciting non-neuromusculoskeletal effects is that I see it every day in practice. I have that clinical experience. I see it. No, it's not an RCT, but if we put together 50,000 chiropractors who are all seeing the same thing, that comprises evidence. Let's take a super, like, holy fuck, super simple example of that. Okay. You're in practice, right?
Mhm.
You ever see one of your patients sleep better after an adjustment?
Yeah.
We're done. Let me explain that a little bit. 50,000 chiropractors, if we all observe that our patients sleep better after adjustments, that comprises clinical evidence, experiential clinical evidence. What does sleep do? Sleep helps to regulate hormone balance. Sleep helps to govern repair and growth, brain health. Sleep is an essential element of human health. If we are impacting a human's ability to achieve deeper or better sleep, we are impacting their overall health. Game over.
Okay, so, from that clip, I hope you can tell that, like, Amy's incredibly intelligent, but in the episode, she breaks it down. I am not afraid to ask dumb questions, because I really want everyone listening, whether they're a chiropractor or not, to walk away from that episode having, feeling a lot more empowered to be bold with talking about chiropractic. So go listen, it's great. The next one, we're gonna change course a little bit, and we're switching into business. So this is Samantha Varner, and this is episode 207. And this was one that I definitely got people messaging me about, like, hey, are you going to work with Samantha? Like, it really prompted some uncomfortable things, looking at our practice more as a consultant with less emotion. And this is the chiropractor versus entrepreneur and being the salesperson of your business. This conversation gave me kind of the boost that I needed to raise my prices at my clinic. And again, just look at my business from less of emotional standpoint and more of that business mindset. So great episode for you clinic owners to go listen to the whole thing. But here is episode 207 with Samantha Varner. And I'm like,
Well,
hey,
so chiropractic school is really interesting. I think it's kind of changing. I mean, I graduated 10 years ago.
yeah,
And when I talk to students now, it feels like it's changing, but ultimately, it's still kind of the same thing that like most people are not entrepreneurs. Like
Right.
you work,
They're chiropractor first, business
yes, they
second.
chose chiropractic not because they love entrepreneurship.
Right.
Chiropractic school does this real or just chiropractic profession in general does a really good job of making you feel like a complete loser if you are working for somebody else. Like I was
Okay.
talking to a friend and she was saying like it's so messed up because like you would never talk to like a medical doctor, and they would be like, "Oh, I'm just a surgeon.
Yeah.
Like
I'm
I
just
just
a
work
hospitalist. I
I
just work
just
in a
I just
hospital.
work for the hospital. I don't actually own the hospital." But within chiropractic, it's like, "Oh, you're just an associate doctor?" And so rumor is when I talk to like chiropractors who coach a lot
Yeah.
and are really in this realm, is that there's only like 20% of chiropractors who are cut out to be running a business. But the percentage that go into eventually owning their own within a few years is like way over 80%. And so I'm just kind of like trying to figure out, like, what are some of those cues that, like, hey, maybe you did find yourself in a business and you're maybe it's time to reevaluate, like exit stage right.
Yeah, yeah. I think it can be two things. I think one, it is skills that you can develop, right? So it is, if you find somebody that can coach you, that can help you, that can like walk you through and then holding you accountable to that, despite the fact you've got a massive patient load and you've got to work with people day in, day out. And so then you have to really take time, carve that out for yourself so you can bird's eye view the rest of what you're trying to do. I think you can still learn to do it. I think it's not like an innate skill that we have, like curling our tongue, right? You can figure out how to be a business owner if you want to. But I do think there is a good point there where it's like there is, maybe it is having that conversation more broadly to be like, there is nothing wrong with, and you can still make good income not owning a chiropractic practice yourself, but actually billing as part of a joint venture. And that comes back to, our chiropractic business is set up to support the doctors
Being
that
able to
don't want to.
pay good. Yes, I was gonna say, like, you're really good at this, by the way. Like, for somebody who does not know much, I was like, oh, well, we just came full circle back
Yeah.
to like, well, a lot of chiropractors can't afford to pay an associate doctor what they
Yeah.
want to pay them because their profitability sucks.
Yeah. 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 So it's like, it's a little bit of like chicken egg problem, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, what is the problem? Is the problem that chiropractic school doesn't teach you how to have a business? Probably. Is it that once you get into the industry, you're forced, kind of subliminally, but still forced into being your practice owner? And then you have no training on how to be a practice owner. So good luck with that. Like, just jump in the pool and hopefully you won't die. But then the only way it seems to make enough money to even feed yourself is to see so many patients you have no time to do business. Oops, this is a terrible plan. Like,
Sam, I hate you.
it's like, shit, right? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so that's why people like me are employable, because I can, there's one thing where if your industry is not training people to run the business, and you guys aren't alone, like I see this with lawyers. I see this with private practice doctors. I see this with dentists and orthodontists get a little bit more in their programs with running a business, but it's still very like cursory. Like, here's a little information. You might need this eventually. And then they're like, yeah, I needed a lot more than that, but okay.
Yeah.
And it's just that willingness to be like, okay, this is part of what I need to do to grow as a business owner. So if I own my own private practice in anything, I need some support. What does that look like for me? How do I learn best? What do I have capacity for? And then finding that, right? And be willing to ask the questions, whether it's leaning on your accountant, leaning on your bookkeeper to help you with the math piece of it and just walking you through that. Getting better at sales, getting better at your marketing, leaning on a marketing agency that can help bring business in, or doing it from kind of an organic standpoint, depending on where you are in your business and how you want to do it. But getting help, I think too many business owners in every industry just struggle along for a really long time before they're like, this is not better. I am really frustrated. And now I'm getting underwater and I can't, how do I fix this before I give up?
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we were at you.
We're at you. So the next part we go to is one of my favorites, is kind of sales and promotion.
Yeah.
So really figuring out like, oh, wait, my job is actually the salesperson of my company. Nobody wants that. No, everybody's like, I'm not the salesperson. When I speak in a room and I'm like, okay, so your number one job is what? And they're like, we're the business owner, whatever. And I'm like, nope, you're the salesperson. They're all like, oh, I don't want to be the sales. Like, again, that negative connotation, but you are the passionate person behind what you're offering for patients. And you have to be the voice of that out in the community to pull people in, right? To engage, to network, to create opportunities for people to know who you are beyond just walking by your storefront. That's not going to probably cut it.
Oh, that's good. So like, I love hearing sales advice from non-chiropractors because I'm so in the world of like, and so, okay, so is what you're saying is that as like an entrepreneur kind of like replaces themselves and they get their time back, what they really need to do is get out into the
Yeah.
community and be networking.
Yeah.
They're like, no, that's what I had to do when I first started. Now I don't need to do that anymore. And they're wrong. That's what you're saying?
They're wrong. They're wrong because the more you can create a band of ambassadors that are out in the world, and this goes for any business, if you can create 30 people in your community that talk about you, even when you're not in the room, that discuss how great your business is, that are really talking about you in comparison to your competitors, that are sending you, you have somebody who's in physiotherapy and they're like, but physiotherapy goes hand in hand with the chiropractor. So how do we build a partnership there where we're cross-referring each other? How do we know where like this comes first, then this comes first? Or you went there thinking that was the solution, but physical therapy isn't the solution right now. Chiropractic is the solution, or deep tissue massage is the solution, or whatever it is, or it's part of the care plan that's all integrated. All of those things are sales methodologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, so you've got, hopefully everybody that's listening, if you're not doing this right now, you need to be getting like patient reviews that are telling other consumer people how great you are, what great experience they've had, what results have been, et cetera, et cetera. But you need that from a bigger standpoint where somebody who has a patient base of 1,000 patients is also talking about you to their patients because you both work in tandem. And making those relationships, that's easy. Because it's like, well, Tim said I needed to just come see you. Well, you've already established trust. You barely have to do anything to convince Tim's patients and for your patients to be convinced that Tim is the next step too, right? And it's reciprocal. So there's a lot of strategies in that way that you can do to build up your patient base, which allows you to fill up everybody's schedule and then expand or get rid of some of your schedule so that you have time to do more of that piece.
Yeah. Do you have any other strategies? Because since we're in this and I just love talking about sales. So like what you said was basically leveraging other professionals that you work in collaboration with. And what's your best advice so like for instance, so our audience tends to be a lot of prenatal, pediatric chiropractors. And so our best people would be pediatricians, midwives, OBs. Midwives are easier because they're a lot of self-employed, but like pediatricians and OBs are like, I don't need you, you need me. And so like, what's some of your best advice as like creating that relationship where maybe the other collaborating salesperson doesn't have time for you?
Yeah, doesn't have time. Okay, so the first question I would say to you is like, okay, think outside the box on who those people have to be. If you are banging your head against the wall to get the OB to get on board, maybe that's not the right person, right? And are they restricted in any ways kind of to be saying, hey, you should go to chiropractic, hey, you should go to, right? So they're somewhat in a legal bind. So even if they personally believe in the strength of doing this as part of your prenatal planning, they might not be able to, right? They're bound by whatever the practices that they're dealing with. So what if you went to ultrasound clinics that are all privately owned?
Yeah.
Right. And they're especially the ones that are doing like the 4D ultrasounds and things like that. So they're getting their patients at the very beginning to confirm, right? If people are freaking out, they're having an early ultrasound. Then they're getting the 20-week ultrasound. So then people are starting to get really excited about where they're at. And if they're starting to kind of have physical problems as a result of giant babies leaning on their pelvis, that's when it's going to start to kind of manifest. And you can probably get a bit ahead of it, I would imagine, if you're starting to do care then. And then you're getting the 40 ultrasounds, which is later in the pregnancy when the baby's getting really big and kind of squishy in there. And then you're ending up with the people who are like, hey, my baby's breech. Let's take a look and see if they are still indeed breech, because we can't tell the bum from the head when we're doing that. Those people, like prenatal photography, that would be another one where they own their business privately. They could recommend you.
Mhm.
When somebody comes into those sessions and they're whining and complaining about, like, my hips hurt, my back hurts, I've got brutal indigestion, whatever their things are. If you have a great relationship with the best prenatal photographers in your area, you could have them say, like, hey, you know what? I know, here's a couple of ideas. Women share like that, right? And it happens all the time.
Yeah, that's good. You're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so S was sales.
Yep. So sales and promotion. So like figuring out and being creative, and then not holding yourself into the box that is your industry. So looking at other industries for other ways that you could potentially create greater results. I think we do get stuck in that, like, well, everybody else is doing this, right? You're in that like Instagram bubble of all the people I follow on Instagram that are in my industry are doing a certain thing, or they're offering a certain program or whatever it looks like. How could we be different? What would make us stand apart? And you don't have to reinvent the wheel, just steal it from somebody else's industry and be like, well, that person over there is doing, that's interesting. Okay, let's see if that would work. Is that appealing for my clients? And that kind of thing can happen quite quickly, right? You can stumble upon something that you're like, what do I love? What business has really appealed to me lately in the world that has an idea that it's like, oh, yes, I could implement. How could we do that? How could we do a ladies' night? How could we do, I don't know, like any sort of activities like that, where you're just getting people into the office to meet the staff, to engage in the environment, to understand, and then incentives to book their first appointments, right? Or to bring a friend or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
Okay, next episode is this was the first male allowed on to the She Slays the Day podcast. This is episode 203. Yes, it took us 203 episodes to have a boy on. And if you go listen to episodes 100 to 200, you'll hear my slowly, like, probably talk about it like 10, 15 times of like, you guys, we need to let the boys on. It doesn't feel good anymore to just have girl. But it needed to be the right guy. And Ben Tapper was the right guy. If you live under a rock and haven't heard of Dr. Ben Tapper, he is an incredibly philosophical chiropractor who kind of skyrocketed to fame during the pandemic with his um, just strong goal towards bringing truth during a time where we really knew very little and we were isolated from truth. He stands up against censorship. He is very, very smart. This episode, go back and listen to episode 203 if you haven't, because you will get schooled on vaccines and what's happening in our body. Like, just absolutely put me to shame as far as like my knowledge of what's going on within the body. So smart. So smart. He says he would, one of the questions I ask him in his episode is basically towards the end. And I ask, like, would you be willing, like, do you still have an open mind on vaccines? Or would you be willing, like, or are you closed-minded that they're the word, I don't know how I asked it. It was a long time ago, but I was nervous to ask it because it was kind of asking, like, have you closed, is the jury out for you and you will never change your mind? And he said he reads all the research, the good and the bad on it. And I truly believe that what he says, when he would politely debate anyone on vaccines because he's so smart. And hey, I would vote for him in a debate if we needed a representative. I'm just saying he'd be my vote. So here is my episode with Dr. Ben Tapper and the need for chiropractors to stand up and fight for their place in medical freedom. You obviously have it's hard to like argue like because like I'm kind of on your side. So but like there are chiropractors who went into chiropractic for to serve in their mind. Well, no, in their hearts, they're serving, but they're doing it a very, very different way. These might be chiropractors that signed up, like got the vaccine, encouraged the vaccine, like just a completely like different mindset than maybe a more like where we originated. But like in their heart, they're serving. So where does that sit with you? Like, can you be okay with going like, all right, you're not serving how I would do it, but like, good for you, you do you, or does that piss you off?
So the docs that are pushing the COVID vaccine, is that your question? Like what? And
No, just
like if
like
they're serving different
you
philosophies.
you brought up chiropractors like that aren't in it in your mind, like they're doing it for the wrong reasons. But like what about the chiropractors who are practicing completely differently than you? Philosophically, do not believe in wellness care, don't believe children should be adjusted, like very rehab. We know we know that these chiropractors are there and I don't think they're bad or whatever, but they definitely practice differently than me. They have different beliefs. They think that philosophy is kind of wasted, but they're still serving their patients in their way.
Right.
Does it
Well,
frustrate you?
oh, totally. I mean, I've had many run-ins with docs like that, especially started curling baloney. I had to educate a lot of these docs on the immune system and the nervous system. I mean, obviously the nervous system controls the immune system. And so there were docs that were trying to send me articles that the immune system and nervous system are not related and all this other garbage and that the adjustments don't do anything for the immune system. And it literally just, I was seeing red. My blood pressure was through the roof. It's one of those things where we need to educate these docs. I feel like these docs are giving the profession a bad name. Now, it doesn't bother me if you want to go do different things in chiropractic or implement different things in your office or therapies or modalities. I can care less about that. But as long as you understand what we do, I mean, don't downgrade chiropractic or don't bash it and don't. So, I mean, the frustration is that they're misrepresenting the profession and they don't fully understand what we do. And so, I mean, that's the frustrating part. And so I believe that chiropractic is one of the most unique professions out there. I think it's the greatest profession in my opinion out there. Excuse me, but again, it's really all about the like what Reggie Gold said, the restoration and maintenance of the integrity of the nervous system. And that's what it's all about.
I would imagine is it fair to say that some of your biggest haters were chiropractors over the last couple of years? Or like not even remotely compared to the hate thing?
Well, that's fair to say. I mean, I pissed off a lot of the world. I mean,
because you're saying they are misrepresenting the profession. And I would imagine that's exactly what they were angry at you for. Like, you're making us look bad. You're making us look like quacks type of thing.
Oh, well, here's the thing. Let me just give you a recap. So my dad fought the vaccine industry since the 70s. I was never vaccinated, caused a massive wedge in the family. My aunt and uncle are pharmacists, and they always wondered why my dad didn't vaccinate us, right? So I never vaccinated my kids. I've been fighting this fight for over 10 years in the vaccine industry, trying to shine light on it, educate as many people. I put on vaccine seminars. I would put on influenza workshops and say, look, there's manipulation of data with a subdivision of the CDC called the National Vital Reporting System. I would talk about the manipulation of numbers, how they're there to push the influenza vaccine, how they always add comorbidities. And I would follow the narrative in legislation very closely. And I would talk about how they're pushing an agenda. Didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what they were planning on doing. I mean, the World Health Organization in 2019 stated that the greatest threat are those who refuse vaccinations. They need to come after people with disinformation. You have the ACIP, which is the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, state that, the greatest, they said that they can't force vaccinate, but they can force compliance. Okay, so that was all going on. And so in 2019, I held a seminar and I was pushing, trying to get this information out there. And so early on, I had patients on Facebook, social media, got me in trouble with a lot of chiros early on because not everybody, there was a lot of chiros on my side. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But the ones that we're talking about here, I had a patient ask me, Dr. Tapper, are you saying that I should come see you if I have Corona? I'm like, yeah, come and see me. It's the best thing you can do. Right. I didn't wear a mask in my office. I didn't have stickers on my door, my floor. I put hands on every patient. My office was a normal place. Right. And so doctors took screenshot of that, what I posted. And they're like, oh, Dr. Tapper's saying that chiropractic can cure COVID. And he's telling patients to come in his office. And so, and that's the thing too. And I would tell these doctors, how many patients do I have to see? How many violations do I have to be in or break before the whole contagion claim is mathematically impossible? And so, we averaged 300 people a week during the whole pandemic, and not once did I get sick. And here I am today. I'm unvaccinated and I've yet to get sick. And so what does that tell you? And so I would have to educate these doctors too, because they were telling me that he's saying that it can help boost the immune system. Well, it baffles me. The frustration part is because, B.J. Palmer wrote a book, in the Beacon during the Spanish flu. And he wrote in there, a few fearful physicians force funny frivolous for a few frenzied folks. And he talked about
how the hell did you memorize that sentence? That is like the most tongue twister ever. Okay.
Right,
say it one more time.
It's a few, oh my goodness, now you're going to put me on the spot.
I'm so sorry. I got in your head.
A few fearful physicians force funny frivolous for a few frenzied folks. And so basically it was about the Spanish flu and the manipulation of data and how there was fear mongering to coerce people into getting the experimental influenza vaccine. Okay. We are literally reliving the era of BJ's time. And so now I apologize, but is your audience mostly chiros?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
I know.
Doctors, listen. This is our time to be bold, to stand the ground, to be the pioneers in our field. The same soil that was rich during B.J. Palmer's time is rich today. And we need to understand that because he wrote the book or the Beacon article, The Spanish Flu, and he shined the light on it. And all they did was it created chiropractic to sprout. And so we need our second generation chiropractors, and that same soil is rich today. They pushed an experimental garbage influenza vaccine 100 years ago. They weaponized the common cold, and they did the same song and dance 100 years ago. And we are literally reliving history here. And so it is vitally important that we recognize that because the people are starving for it. And the tides have turned right now in the favor of true health. People they're begging for this information. And so we need to be the pioneers in this field and educate the masses, not only on just the crony baloney and the COVID vaccine and all this nonsense, but on all vaccines. I mean, it goes against physiology. It goes against the way God made the immune system, the nervous system. And so that's what it's all about. And, and so that's my heart for these chiros to really take the reins of this mess because the time is now. It really is.
Okay, I like how we're bouncing back and forth between topics because now we are taking another pivot and we're going into money myths. 2023, well, actually, okay, 2021 and 2022 were years for me where Kirby and I really started to get very strategic about our long-term plan. We're going to be empty nesters at 48. And freedom is something that's very important to me that I wanted to make sure we didn't get to 48. And I was like, we're empty nest. Like, I want more freedom now that our kids are gone, but I have this clinic over here. And so we started I should say I started. Kirby has a finance and consulting degree, but I started really getting invested into long-term money decisions that we should be making, and just starting to get smart because I'm definitely the spender of the family, and he's the investor. And so once we started to create goals together, it allowed us to get on the same page and, really increase the chances that we are going to reach those goals in time. So 2023 was a year where I really opened up the podcast to some of these conversations around money. Last year was the first year that we had the multi-passionate chiropreneur. Quick plug, if it is before January 22nd, that you still might have a chance to join our 2024 program, where we're talking about all, how to get chiropractors thinking about their money in a different way, getting it working for them and not being chained to this one career that we love so much, but the joy can get squeezed out of it when all of our eggs are in that basket to make all of our money from chiropractic. And so Stephanie Walter is in episode 199. And the title of this is Explaining Money Myths. Mind-blowing episode. If you are even remotely interested in starting to make your money work for you, go back and listen to this episode. Oh my gosh, just crazy. I think at one point my jaws just dropped and I'm like, what? No, that can't be true. But we just talk about how a lot of us were, if you have boomers or Gen X as parents, it we were, I don't want to say brainwashed. They were brainwashed. And then we kind of were millennials were continued to be told, just go get your education and it will pay off. And then we have all of this debt and are holding substantially less wealth in the prime of our life than previous generations were. So, okay, I'm not going to spoil more beans, spill beans, spoil the sauce. What do we spoil? Just spoiler. No. Okay. Anyways, we're not spilling any more beans. Go or listen to this segment. And then if you love it, go back and listen to Stephanie Walter in episode 199. So like even my like visceral reaction to the like hearing two really cool things is like, what's the catch? Where's the thing? Is this tethered to a lot of like the myths that you talk about that we have as a society?
Yes, yep, it is. It's definitely why I wrote this book, because I wanted to talk about myths that are pervasive. And unfortunately, I think the sad thing is that most of the myths that we know about have been perpetuated by the financial institutions that make tons and tons of money based on your money sitting with them. But
Well, I mean, chiropractors are very comfortable with this and big pharma. So like we can attach to that, like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense that could happen. So what are some of those myths?
well, I think the big myth is the mindset of utilizing your money rather than accumulating your money. We have all
I
been
love
taught
that.
since young ages that we put the money aside. We'll start at 20 and we'll start contributing in 401k or whatever for 30 years, and then all of a sudden they'll give your money back. But what you don't realize is you're turning your money over to this institution that's making money on you all along. Their goal is to hold your money as long as they can and give it back as slow as they can. Well, these goals describe what happens in an IRA. And I mean, I have it somewhere in my book. I apologize, not right offhand, but the wealth that's in the 401k right now is staggering. And so it's something that they make a great deal of money perpetuating these myths for people. So I say, like, if someone's skeptical, if you want to stay in the 401k, I'm not gonna,
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, do it.
but I say just look into truly diversifying, which means non-market related assets.
Right.
And
Well, so, I mean, I feel like my husband and I will get a little bit of this worry when we talk to our parents about, like, and there is no good debt, bad debt in previous generations. It's just like this idea that like debt is bad. My husband tells a story about how like buying a car, even back then, like they had to save up for a car because it was like 30% interest on a car. And so it's that mindset that like, we have multiple commercial buildings that we own. And like, I can just tell every time we like buy one, our parents are just like getting more and more nervous about like, that's a lot of debt. I'm like, right, but like it's going to be cash flow positive and this and that. It's just like a completely different getting your money to work for you.
that's right. And there, I think Robert Kiyosaki, I have a couple quotes of his in my book, but he says, you know, the type of advice you seek is, you know, tells you where you're going to end up from the different people. So like a Dave Ramsey and a Susie Orman, who talk very much about lowering the debt, budgeting, getting yourself debt free, is the way to get to wealth. Really isn't, I don't believe that is true. But like the more sophisticated or understanding people are to these outside concepts, these concepts that are have been here forever. I mean, these companies we're working with are banks that have been around and insurance companies that have been around for hundreds of years. So these are very stable things, but people just have not heard of them because in our traditional personal finance discussions that we get at school, nobody talks about this stuff.
No. Well, okay, so I'm gonna ask a question. It might come across like an asshole thing, not to you, but like you'll understand. There's kind of some landmines here. I once heard someone on a podcast call out that like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman are super successful because most of America doesn't have any money. Most of America is, at a certain lower socioeconomic status. And so that is good advice for a lower socioeconomic, but it's not necessarily good advice if you're in upper middle class or, like especially.
Nailed it on the head. Is yes, that is their bread and butter. And the fact is that there should be different levels of advice for different people, but there simply hasn't been. And so I found, and that the busy professional, the attorney, chiropractor, doctor, these people are very underserved by financial planners. They just simply are.
And you hit it. We don't learn jack shit about any of this stuff. Like taking.
The crazy thing is if you went to college and you took a finance class about corporate finance strategies, all of these things I'm talking about would come up. Finding cash flow, finding leveraging into these assets that grow with very low risk to them. These are all strategies that corporations use to build their wealth. But our personal finance strategy is that we're taught is very much like what Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman talk about. And there are different levels. And like I said, the high performing person is usually underserved by the typical financial planner.
How is angel investing different than syndication?
Angel investing is for venture capital. Now, I have a lot of wealthy people that invest in venture capital too. In fact, if I did an asset allocation of my group of investors, I would tell you that probably 20% are in the stock market. 20% of their portfolios in the stock market, 30% is in venture capital, 30% is in real estate, and then 30%, and then the rest is just in little fun stuff for them to play with. Okay. But their solid ones are in real estate and venture capital. Venture capital is people that are seeking money for their businesses.
Shark Tank. It's Shark Tank, right? Okay.
Bigger companies usually, and you can be in different stages of companies that are looking for, to expand or whatnot. But again, the reason that the wealthy people enjoy these types of things is instead of investing in the stock market where you could be in a mutual fund and you don't know anything. tell me one thing about one of the companies you're invested in. Tell me about a CEO, tell me about something. They won't be able to tell you a thing. Whereas when you're investing in venture capital, you know what their strategy is, what the background is, what the CEO and the team up front is planning to do, what their experience is, have they done it before? So I would argue that wealthy people are much closely tied to what they're investing in. They're very concerned with investing in teams of people that do what they want to do much better, that they know that this is not their thing, but yet they're going to vet for the best person to do this for them, and then they invest in it.
Got it. Okay. Do you have time for one more myth? Because I want to hear another one.
Let's see, where did we go in? I think we talked about the 401k. I think, a big one is most people, and this drives me insanely crazy, is you'll go to a financial planner, and actually, sidebar, I had my series 6 and 7 for years when I was an insurance agent. And what I would do when I go in to talk to someone is, okay, so how old are you? What are your assets? What's your experience in the market? What's your risk tolerance? Can you tolerate like a lot of risk or not so much risk? And the idea is that the more risk you can tolerate, the more money you're going to be able to make. And that is completely the opposite of what the reality of the wealthy investor. They want to look for things that are extremely low risk. And there is no correlation to high returns and high risk tolerance. So, and I think that's a huge myth. I don't know that it'll ever go away. But it's not that's what we're told.
Do you think we're just kind of obsessed with that rags to riches overnight story, that like winning the lottery ticket, striking gold, like it's kind of like innately in us that like.
And it's like exactly. But your investment, your money should not be gambled. I mean, it's your money, and it is very much like, I never met anyone in my time when I was advising people like a financial planner would, that ever knew when something was coming down the pike, like a 2008. Never knew, never had a clue, never advised their clients, never, because they don't know.
Right.
They don't know any more than you do. That's the sad part of most financial.
That's terrifying. Yeah. Because I really don't know a lot. Okay, our final clip from our best of 2023 was absolutely one of our most engaged episodes. I was getting DMs. Thank God I was not getting pictures from y'all, because this was about a parasite cleanse. We had Kim Rogers on for episode 213 talking about parasites and cleansing and where we could pick up parasites. And it definitely woke some of us up. Let's just say I've had some patients listen to this episode multiple times. Kirby and I have we've done 2 months of cleansing. Because if you've done like Cellcore before, the big thing about Kim Rogers' program is that it is gentler on the system. So our kids were able to do it. I've had some patients that have done Cellcore, or like Chiros have told me, like, I did Cellcore and it beat me up. I haven't been right ever since. So Cellcore is intense, and I wouldn't necessarily have my kids go on it. But my kids did Kim Rogers tinctures. And they're gentler, that we can do. We now are at a place, once we did 2 months of them, we do about a week of cleansing, like 3 days before and 3 days after every full moon. That's because that's when melatonin is at its lowest, and the parasites are most active because we have the most serotonin, and they like to go through our blood chomping on our serotonin. Ew. So like I said, I definitely got some DMs from this one. No pictures. Thank you. If you are interested in doing Kim Rogers'
is Rogers Hood Cleanse. Make sure at checkout you use promo code SheSlays, all caps, all one word, and you can save 10% on your entire order. I recommend starting with the Parify kit. And then, yeah, we're going to Mexico. And so, like, our family's already talked me. I ordered my kit yesterday because when we get back, we will all do probably at least 2 or 3 weeks of cleansing because that's one of the things she says. If you've ever been to Mexico, you need to do a cleanse. So, here is Kim Rogers and what the cleanse process can look like for our people.
So how young can someone detox or
Well,
do this?
with Parify, we say age 3 and up.
Okay.
We went off of the most strict herb, which was wormwood. Wormwood says 3 and up can do it. So any child below 3, we just say you need to do zeolite. That helps remove the heavy metals, which then releases the parasites. But it doesn't necessarily kill the parasites, and that's the issue. You're at least getting it to a point where it's manageable.
Okay. So what would somebody expect? I mean, obviously it depends on how many parasites and where, but like, is it, are you tired? Are you getting headaches?
Mhm.
Are you like, what is the process? Like, do you have to eat certain ways? Like, how
Yeah.
long does it take?
So it can, our kit's 30 days, but some companies do like 90 days, 100, I just didn't want to make someone buy a 90-day kit and then they're like, this is just not for me. And then they spent all this money. So we say 30 days, see what happens. And it's $100. So it's like, well, I mean, if all of a sudden you're 6 days in, you spent $100 and it works great. You're 6 days in. I mean, it could take 30 plus days. Like you're making your body inhospitable the best way that you can for them to not live in you anymore. And so you do have a diet that you should follow, but it's a guide. No meat, no alcohol, no carbs. And yeah, I mean, but the thing is like my husband doesn't ever follow it and he has very successful cleanses, but his cleanses are a little longer and he has maybe a few more die-offs than I do just because, not anymore, but when we were doing it, he had way more die-offs. That's what we call them when they're dying off. Obviously, the word die-off should make you think that like things are dying in you because they are. You're literally taking herbs to kill things in you to get rid of them. So flu-like symptoms, headache is pretty common. Huge breakouts is very common. So, those are kind of the common things that when you're going through a process of detoxing, you're going to have happen.
So I'm
But
assuming
then,
the meat is because you don't want to be just adding more parasites
yeah,
in.
that and they like it. Like you're trying to not feed them, you're trying to rid them. And so you're trying to not make them stronger, you're trying to weaken them.
So I mean, it sounded like you're just eating fruits and vegetables.
You can eat white meat and
Oh.
grass-fed beef,
Oh,
but if
okay.
you really wanna push through, like, a lot of cleansers, just the more you cut the diet and make it the easier, but just because you don't do it, doesn't mean it's not gonna work. So I
Right.
think that that's kind of where an indoctrination happened to us, where we were told, "Oh, if you drink milk with this antibiotic, it's not gonna work anymore." That's not really the way herbs work, but you're trying to rid your body of them. So we try and tell you, like, do the best you can by not taking on the food that we say not to take. But
Okay.
you're still going to have a successful cleanse.
What is the grossest or weirdest story you've had a client or patient who's bought the Parify tell you?
Oh my God, there's so many
I bet there
because
is.
we've sold like tens of thousands of these kits. We're so busy. We do like 1,000 a week of kits. It's quite insane. It's quite insane how busy we are.
So
Yeah.
so people are just it's just mostly stuff that's coming out in their bowels.
Yeah.
And then how do
Bowels.
they you had said something about testing. So like if I do the Parify and I'm like
Mhm.
looking at my poop and I'm like, well, there's nothing swimming in there.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling normal and no change. Like, would you say then like send your poop in and get it tested?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who's testing
So
my poop?
parasites.org is a
Don't
company
mail it
that
to
I go
you.
through. They'll mail everything to you. I don't trust LabCorp. Sorry. I just don't. I actually did my stool with LabCorp and with parasites.org, same stool, sent them off. LabCorp came back negative. parasites.org came back with crypto. So I don't trust the full system, but unfortunately, most doctors don't believe parasites.org. So your insurance company is probably not going to pay for anything, and that becomes the problem. Anyway, if you're still feeling yucky or nothing happened, it's like $250 to get your stool tested. And they test 35 different worms and parasites. And it's all they do all day. They get stool, they look at it under a microscope, multiple different types, multiple different samples. So when I trained LabCorp people, so this is how I know that LabCorp does what they do, because I worked in academia and I ran 25 healthcare colleges for DeVry and I was a professor. So I trained lab people, I trained medical assistants, medical billing, coding, and pharmacy. So I trained all these people. So I know they only get 3 minutes to spend on stool. And if for some reason nothing comes up, they automatically mark it negative, but they put in the fine print that this is not guaranteeing you don't have a parasitic infection. It's just we didn't see eggs or a worm at this time. So that's the difference. So they're not looking at it all day. It's probably some 20-year-old kid in the lab who just got out of school and he has 3 minutes to look at your stool and move past it. But they're not saying that they
He's not
didn't.
getting paid enough. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like maybe $13 an hour. And most doctors don't know when you're looking at blood work on a full moon is when you should get your blood work done and then have them look at it, because the EOS in your blood is a clear indication you either have parasites, mold, or fungus growing in your body.
Okay, and that is a wrap on 2023's best of episodes. Uh, Thank you again for each one of you that listens each week, that shares on Facebook and Instagram, that sends me DMs, that engages with me in the podcast. You know, as you can imagine, sitting behind a microphone can be kind of lonely. And so you are the number one reason that I keep doing this. And please keep reaching out, sending me guest ideas, sharing the podcast, rating, and just overall being an awesome listener. Thank you so much for your support. And I look forward to what the hell we're going to do with this in 2024. Good luck.